This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Good morning. It's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we have a very, very special guest. I'm very excited about this guest. His name is Robert Barnes. And the reason I'm impressed with him, because I'm generally one of the faces in the crowd watching this guy stand up there and saying things I wish more people would say. And for those that may not know this, Robert Barnes is a trial lawyer. He's a very high-profile client. He takes on the cases that few people would dare take on. But the reason I'm happy or excited or honored to have him part of this program is, as Kim and I have grown up in the business of being entrepreneurs, we've met many different types of attorneys. Not all attorneys are equal. And the thing that I'm most disappointed about is most attorneys are like those A students. They hide behind the law. I mean, they know the law, but they haven't got any guts. I mean, they really have no guts. And we're at the point today because people have no guts. You know, I'm afraid to say things right now, so it's called self-censorship. So as a person who sits in the audience, I was at George Gammon's event, and I've seen you at several other events where you stand up and you say what everybody wishes more people would say, but they don't know the law. But at least you know the law, and you're willing to stand up and back up what the law says. Any comments there, Kim?
Well, I so enjoyed listening to you at George Gammon's event. You were my favorite speaker just because of what Robert's saying is I'm looking for people that are fighting because we want to fight for what's going on here. And I went to your website and it says the champion of the underdog and crusader of the Constitution. And I am like, yes, absolutely. So I'm concerned about what's happening to our Constitution. I'm concerned about what's happening to our freedoms. And I so welcome and applaud and thank you for doing what you're doing.
So Mr. Barnes, I'd like to go into first of all, the education and profession of law, because I've met so many lawyers who know the law. They've got no guts at all. And they hide, they cringe. They go, oh, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. They're more terrified than I am. And I'm asking this yo-yo to protect me. So what's going on in your profession of the law where you have so many attorneys with no guts?
The system itself is sort of creating a group of people that consider themselves more servants of the state than servants of the law, servants of their clients, servants of the Constitution. And it's deliberate. I mean, so they've kind of institutionalized who gets into law school, who gets promoted in law school, who gets promoted in the practice of law and the profession of law. If you're an outsider lawyer, if you're a dissident lawyer, if you're a lawyer who challenges and contests power, then you're a lawyer who gets targeted by the system. You're going to be subject to more ethics complaints. You're going to be subject to more bar investigations. You're going to be subject to more judicial criticisms. You're going to be subject to more a range of adverse actions against you in your professional employment. And so the system has got better and better and better at filtering out what I would loosely call the Snowden problem. They don't want people with independent conscience to be part of the law. They don't want people who have an instinctual resistance to the system and the state to be part of the practice and profession of law, because, as you noted, it's so critical for ordinary, everyday people from a wide range of backgrounds to be able to fight the state, for the individual to be able to stand up for individual rights, for people of conscience to be able to stand up for their conscience. They need a legal advocate, particularly in America, in our system of justice and laws. They need a legal advocate to be able to effectually be able to protect themselves. I represented Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle was a kid who defended himself, but if he didn't have a lot of lawyers, I was the court of public opinion, the other lawyers in court, then he would be in prison today. So would
you say who Kyle Rittenhouse is, because many people may not know, because we're an international show.
Yeah, so Kyle Rittenhouse, 17-year-old kid, never had any issues in his entire background. Kenosha was burning down in the so-called Summer of Love, according to the Seattle mayor. And these were mostly minority, immigrant, and women-owned businesses that were being destroyed by leftists in the name of social justice. And this is the community that he comes from. He came from a suburban community that was right across the border, the Illinois border. That's where he physically lived, but his father, his grandmother, his aunt, his job, his friends were all in the town of Kenosha. He went down to protect Kenosha, and because he was asked to. He was asked to by his friends because the police had abandoned part of Kenosha. The governor wouldn't send in the National Guard while people got beat and buildings got burnt and dreams got destroyed. And some people on the left said, oh, it's only property. No, that was people's dreams. That was people's livelihoods. That was people's futures. That's what that was. And so he went down with some others to try to protect it. And because he was there, he looked 17, he looked like the most innocent, naive kid in the world. He was targeted that night. They tried to ambush him. They tried to beat him. They tried to kill him. He defended himself. And for defending himself, he defended himself against a convicted pedophile. Then he defended himself against a man who had tried to kill his own family members. Then he defended himself against a man who had recently just been released for various crimes he had committed. So and defended himself against another man who was already back in jail within a week. So because he defended himself against these people, the local politicized prosecutor put Kyle Rittenhouse on trial and tried to put him in prison for life. And he would have been there, even though it was the most perfect self-defense case I've ever had, the most innocent, naive, sweetest kid I've ever defended, and one of the most good, righteous families I've ever had the privilege to protect in the court of public opinion and the courts of law. Despite all of that, the prosecutor used by hook and by crook tried to put him in prison for life. And he wouldn't have been there but for ordinary everyday people coming to his defense because they were a poor family, to be able to mount a defense, to be able to even post bail so he wasn't in jail for a year and a half waiting for trial. That case is symbolic and emblematic of how the law and lawyers are needed, even for the most innocent people, to get even a little bit of justice in our system. And the system doesn't like that. The system wants to be able to control the outcomes, so they try to rig who becomes lawyers and who becomes successful lawyers, so ordinary people don't have an adequate defense in the court of law.
And there's one more step because it goes to freedom of speech. Or another thing is the freedom of speech does not include lying. I mean, people who know me know I'm a hardcore gun advocate, to say the least. But, they say he crossed state lines with a weapon. Well, that's not illegal. And then, of course, he shot 3 black people, and they weren't black. My question is, how can the press stand there and lie and nobody take them on?
What's extraordinary about this is it's a function of our system of justice that says if a prosecutor brings a prosecution in court, then basically the media and anybody in the public can then use that existence of that prosecution to completely lie about an individual. It's how our criminal justice system is so dangerous, because we have prosecutors have so much power. The prosecutor can't be sued under this nonsense doctrine, in my view, of sovereign immunity, an idea that comes back from the king. I mean, the idea that here we are in an American democracy, and we have an idea that said the king can do no wrong, so the king can never be sued. And we apply it to every politician in America, every prosecutor in America. And it's like, how in the world are those people protected from suit for bad actions? But it's not just them. Once they bring a criminal prosecution, everybody's allowed to lie about you, according to the courts, because the courts say, well, there's a criminal prosecution. And because there's a criminal prosecution, that gives them an excuse, a legal excuse to say pretty much whatever they want about you if it relates to that criminal prosecution. So even though he never traveled across state lines with a gun, even though he never shot any black person, even though he was the person defending minority, immigrant, women-owned businesses from the people that one of the main people that attacked him, from a guy who was making racist statements all night long, he's the one who gets tagged with the racist line, even though he was the one defending minorities and immigrants that night.
So the obvious question then is, how much of that is going on if they don't? If I have really, you're one of the only. I hate to say this, my attorneys will kill me. You're one of the few attorneys with, as they say, the Mexicans call cojones, balls. And I think, but systemically, I've never met people so afraid. One of the worst things we do is we self-censor now. Like even now, I'm going, well, should we have Robert Barnes on or not? Because socialist media will take us down.
And to
that's censorship.
Yes, and to that point of censorship and free speech, one of the things I heard you say, Robert, and it's not reported in mainstream news at all, there are a lot of cases that are fighting for our freedom of speech. Is that correct? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been doing these cases for 20 years, but there have not been a lot of lawyers join me in the effort. And it's because two reasons. One, sometimes they can be economically difficult cases. You're representing people who don't always have the means to pay. So you're doing a lot of work sometimes you're not going to get reimbursed for. And so there's some of that, but there's also is so much hostility from the state and the courts and the press that you're going to get attacked. Like the moment I represented Alex Jones, I was suddenly subject to like 6 hit pieces in different media stories across the country. And it was just because I was representing him. And even though what he was arguing for was the freedom of press, freedom of speech, something the media claims they care about, they would be because he was persona non grata within parts of the institutional press, then I all of a sudden had to be a target because they didn't want anybody to defend him. They didn't want anybody to protect him. They didn't want anybody to argue for his constitutional rights because solely of his politics. And so that's one of the key fights. There are many other key cases we have that are that are the front lines of this. You look at what's happening in the current context. I mean, just the other day, a British doctor was able to get his license restored because his license had been suspended solely based on public statements he made differing with the government about pandemic response policy. They weren't able to prove that a single statement that he had made was actually false. They said, but you're saying things that undermine confidence in the government. Well, that's what free speech is there for, to undermine confidence in bad government, as needs to happen. So it's critical that more lawyers step up to the plate, and a few have, but not enough.
So one more guy I have tremendous respect on is Robert Kennedy Jr. He just came out with that book not against, but kind of exposing Fauci and Bill Gates and Big Pharma and all that. So what do you think about Robert Kennedy Jr.? Because I had tremendous respect for the family, and now they have one grandson that's standing up.
Extraordinarily conscientious individual. So I'm co-counsel with him on suits against the FDA. We're bringing another suit this month against the FDA for their emergency use authorization of the vaccine for children because they did not follow their own protocols and procedures before approving it. They're mislabeling it. They're using Sesame Street and Big Bird to try to market it to little kids. To 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And because, Sesame Street's audience goes as young as 3, despite the fact there's a lot of reasons to be doubtful that this is a good public health idea for young children especially. And he's one of the first people to step up. And he's a guy who's been subject to hit piece after hit piece merely because he was able to broach that maybe we shouldn't treat Big Pharma as a substitute for Jesus, that maybe Big Pharma is not the most reliable, trustworthy barometer of public health and truth in America, particularly when it comes to drugs. And for that, he's had family members attack him. The press attacks him. Instagram kicked him off of Instagram. All he did was start quoting government's own database, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System database. And because he just republished what the government's own data showed, they removed him from Instagram. Speaking of free speech, he has a great lawsuit against Facebook currently before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that might redefine how much social media can engage in big big media censorship, big tech censorship, because he was able to document that the government was colluding with Facebook, solely targeting him to get fewer people to hear his voice. But it's not fully working because, as you know, his book came out. He sold out 100,000 plus within 2 days. You can still get the digital book. The regular book will be ready right on Christmas Eve. And I can't think of a better Christmas Eve gift than Bobby Kennedy's book about Anthony Fauci.
I have that book. It's a tough, I hate to say this, but it's a tough book to read. He is documented. He's backed it up. He reads like a law document.
He spent like 6 months just doing that, making sure he had every evidentiary foundation for every claim he made.
It shows.
And it's terrifying when you read it about where we are at and why we're there.
Are there more guys like you and Kennedy coming up?
I have a young lawyer that just graduated from law school that is of that mindset. Some really young lawyers have that capacity. Almost nobody who's experienced. There's about a half dozen lawyers helping on vaccine mandate cases who are good. But for most of them, it's a one-off. In other words, they're not going to be joining the fight in other arenas the way Kennedy is. Oh, absolutely. There's no money. You're going to get harassed by the media. You're going to get harassed by judges who don't like you being the lawyer, because they want mediocre lawyers handling these cases, or no lawyer handling these cases. So they're always going to put a tax on you, a personal price you're going to have to pay for doing what you do.
And in the Bobby Kennedy book against Fauci, he says it's genocide. He doesn't say these are my words, which will mean we could listen to this program quickly because it will be taken down. So,
and we're gonna take a quick break. But
wait, 1 second. So what he says there, it's genocide against little brown people. I mean, he says it. And I sit there going, man, that Kennedy has got cojones. So everybody listen to this program quickly because it won't be up very long. We'll be right back.
And when we come back, I want to talk to Robert. I want to talk to you about the vaccine mandates and what's happening there, because it's just getting stricter. New York just passed policy. So yeah, I'd like to talk about it because I see lawsuits coming all over the place. So we'll be right back.
Hello, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, good news and bad news about money. Today we have one of the most dangerous guests we've ever had on this program. I don't mean just dangerous because he's dangerous, but it's dangerous what we're talking about today, because our freedom of speech is gone, is totally toasted. And I'm honored to have Robert Barnes on, because he's one of the few attorneys I know left with any guts and cojones and the right to stand up for free speech, for the rights of people. And he fights for the underdogs, and he is infamous. And I wish there was more people like him. But in the first part of this program, he explains basically our education system doesn't want these people coming up. And I would say that I've never met such emotionally sensitive people in my life coming out of school. You hurt my feelings. You hurt my feelings. You hurt me. I'm going, holy mackerel. How do I went to military school, so being hurt emotionally was part of the process. That makes you stronger. But anyway, I'm very honored to have Robert Barnes. I'll say I've been in the audience watching him, so it's an honor to just talk to him face to face. Comments, Kim?
Well, and Robert Barnes, if you don't know of him, he's a trial lawyer, high profile cases, and he speaks for the people that can't speak often. Often the underdog is who he takes on, which is what I love. And so, Robert, I just wanted to start with the vaccine mandates, because they call it emergency use. They can get away with saying, yeah, you have to get vaccinated or you're going to lose your job. What's happening in your world around that?
So, I mean, when we initially started the fight against these vaccine mandates, and it was basically just Bobby Kennedy and I about 9 months ago. What's been good is more and more people have joined the fight because of the court of public opinion. People out there making noise about it led to legislators and governors and congressmen starting to make noise about it, which in turn translated into more lawyers jumping on. There are lawyers right now that are leading the fight or partially leading the fight against vaccine mandates who told me 6 months ago there was no argument for it and just fold and go home. But they suddenly discovered their own cojones when the American people made them do so. And so that's the good news. And the courts are finally discovering a voice, because what was terrifying was the courts were going back and bringing up these corpses, these dangerous, perilous precedents that basically establish the right for the government to own your body. And if the government owns your body, what do you own? What freedom do you have if the government has the right to put whatever they want, whenever they want, into your physical body, including drugs that can change your body permanently? And so that's why it was critical of this fight. This fight goes beyond just COVID. It goes beyond just this vaccine. It's about the government's power to control you completely. Because, I mean, what stops them from, Bill Gates loves the idea of putting a chip on somebody that will be their personal identification card, that will be their means of banking, that will be their means of travel, that will be their means of getting medicine, be their means of employment. He thinks this would be a great idea for the world. This is what happens when you let big tech nerds out of their basement and try to run public health policy. And so to fight this, to resist this, has been a great legal fight. So far, the Biden administration has already lost. And they try to claim that OSHA has emergency power to give a mandate in the name of health safety at workplaces to mandate everybody get a vaccine. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals came in and said, no, you obviously don't. You don't have that power constitutionally, and Congress didn't give it to you either anyway. So that was set aside. So the OSHA mandate is dead. The second mandate that they put in was, we regulate Medicare. And since we regulate Medicare, we're going to say if anybody receives any money connected to Medicare in any way, shape, or form, and it's a huge portion of the economy, then now you have to vaccine mandate all your employees. Federal court said, no, again, the Constitution didn't give you that power. Congress didn't give you that power. That's unconstitutional and illegal, and enjoined it and said you can't go forward. forward. So that mandate has been set aside. Now we have the federal contractor mandate because, again, the Biden administration came up every way by hook and by crook to try to impose this mandate on people and claiming that the government's ability to make sure, this is particularly apt for your audience, there's a law that says the president should make sure that things are done efficiently, that things are done economically well. They used that as the pretext to say they could do a vaccine mandate on everybody, saying if we impose a vaccine mandate on everybody, suddenly government services are going to become more efficient. When in fact, of course, the evidence is it would become far less efficient because it turns out lots of people leaving employment, up to 10% of employees said they were going to leave rather than take the vaccine, is probably not a good way to have a streamlined, efficient government services. That, too, has now been set aside in some courts already. Then there's the federal employee mandate still pending in federal courts. And then you get to now city and state governments. The San Diego school system has imposed a vaccine mandate. That's being challenged in the courts. There's the city of New York is now expanding and extending its vaccine mandate on its citizens, which have been protested strongly by minority citizens, particularly African Americans and black citizens in the city of New York, because they are disproportionately saying they want nothing to do with the vaccine mandate. They already have a disproportionate high number of people who've already have natural immunity because they already had COVID. And they're like, I'm sorry, but we don't want to be the subject of government experimentation on our bodies. It turns out, black Americans have a history. They understand where that goes. They understand where that's been, just like many Native Americans are leading the effort to resist. Why? Because it turns out they don't like the idea of the government knocking on their door and saying, we just would like to stick a little something in your kid. That, too, hasn't had a history of turning out well. So, and then I'm leading the fight with other lawyers against all these private employer mandates. So Tyson Foods has issued a vaccine mandate, laid off a bunch of people. They called it unpaid leave, which in my world is called being fired. And so we've brought suit against them. They claim that they're doing so on the behest of the federal government. And so that means they're subject to the same liability as the federal government. There's the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. There's the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, all of which I think apply in this context. And so we've extended and expanded our suit against Tyson Foods that we brought in Tennessee. And then we're all, last but not least, going to be bringing suit against the emergency use authorization by the FDA with Bobby Kennedy, because what's happening is, as you note, they're abusing emergency powers. Yes. They're finding all the loopholes that a lot of us said, hey, don't give the government that power. They're going to misuse it and abuse it someday. They're going to claim it's a loophole that swallows the rule. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying this emergency use authorization statute allows them to mandate, enforce, and approve vaccines on people without meeting the biologic licensing standards that the FDA itself has set, without abiding by the marketing limitations and advertising limitations that the FDA itself has set, without doing the citizen petition process, without doing the notice and comment process. And most egregiously, they now claim this statute allows them to no court can review their action. No citizen can sue them.
So let me add one more thing to the group here is that, the blacks don't trust them. The Indians don't trust them because they screwed the Indians. But the Japanese don't trust them either because they locked us up. We're doing World War II. They put all the Japanese in concentration camps, and they took their land from them.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
indeed, the whole basis of that, of the Korematsu decision that allowed for forced detention camps based on where your granddaddy was born, the case they cited, Buck v. Bell and Jacobson. And it all started with Jacobson. Jacobson was the decision that said, yeah, it's okay to do a small fine for if you don't take a smallpox vaccine during a smallpox epidemic. But then they took that decision. They said, yeah, it's actually okay to do forced sterilizations. We can decide who can have kids and who can't have kids. And then they went from there and said, actually, we can just lock everybody up if we don't like who your granddaddy was. Take away your business, take away your religious rights, your family rights, your associational rights, your property rights, your speech rights, you name it. And that's why, 1947, the Nuremberg Code that we announced, the Americans announced, were so universally applicable that you could be hung for violating it, as the Nazis were, because the Nuremberg Code wasn't part of the German law, but they said it was part of the internationally recognized standards that is part of the law of every civilized society. It doesn't have to be further defined in it. And we were supposed to never go back on that, yet here we are.
Right. So let me just bring this back up again. They didn't lock the Chinese up. They locked the Japanese up. That's. Yes. I sit there going, how did we forget about that?
Very selective. They didn't lock the Germans up either. Now, of course, there are too many Germans in America to try that. So
they couldn't do it in Hawaii because there are too many Japanese.
So one other question: when you talk about the emergency use, if they lift that emergency use, then in theory these mandates go away.
All the mandates are based on the fact that the FDA has authorized these vaccines. Without FDA authorization, nobody can mandate the vaccine. Now, what's fascinating is they're playing a game of it's the other person's responsibility. No, it's that person's responsibility. So, for example, the FDA, when we sue them, they say, oh, it's not our fault that anybody's mandating the vaccine, even though all the people mandating the vaccine are depending upon the FDA authorizing it for that to happen. Indeed, when you sue other people like Tyson Foods, they say, oh, really, it's FDA's fault because they're the ones who authorized all this. And so they're playing a game of nobody can be sued because it's the other guy's fault.
So let's get back to the bigger picture here, because you're involved in the core of America right now. You are basically fighting for a constitution. It's not just so when you look at this, you have this vaccine passport coming up, and then you're suing the Fed with George Gammon. I mean, Jesus, why don't you take on some big clients for a change?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
yeah. Start small with the FDA.
Give me a break. And then big pharma and the Fed are going, holy mackerel, But,
exactly. Well, I tell people if I get into any trouble, I'll just tell people it was George's idea.
I know. Don't say that. George is one of our dearest friends, and he's a little close in proximity to us. I don't want a drone strike on us, accidentally. But anyway, if you have the vaccine passport, you have mandated masking, and then you have government coin, GovCoin, there's a government Fed coin. Aren't those all surveillance documents? It's like Siri and Alexa. They're all surveillance documents. So you have the vaccine passport, and then you have the Fed coin. And you're suing the Fed, and you're going out to big pharma. I mean, who else can you take on? God?
Well, essentially these days, it's right. Well, we'll probably sue Bill Gates at some point. Then we'll have the trifecta.
Oh my God!
There we go.
Oh, that's God. I forgot. Excuse me.
Exactly.
I didn't go to the God of Bill Gates. So church. Anyway,
no doubt. It's the ultimate combination of power and authority. That, especially if you continue to degrade the currency like they are with our inflationary environment, one ultimate solution is going to be basically a digital coin that the government controls. And if you look at what Bill Gates has explicitly been involved in, going back to India and other places, it would be something that would be a actual physical chip in your body. That would be your currency, your identification, your medical records, all of it. And it is, as you note, ultimate control. And that's what it's about, because currency is really control these days. Once it became a fiat system, it became a system that is about regulating and controlling what people do. A lot of our tax laws are really about control. They're not really, the amount of information people give up, they don't realize. Basically, they confess most of their lives on their 1040 each year. Who is my intimate partner? Who is my family? What church do I go to? What party do I give money to? What charities do I care about? Where do I live? How do I live on a daily basis? They're confessing every year in the hopes of getting one more little tax deduction. It's a genius of the system. It's the ultimate form of censorship and control. And now, of course, that's not a coincidence. At the same time the Biden administration is announcing vaccine mandates, it's saying, wouldn't it be nice if we had about another 100,000 IRS agents to rummage through everybody's private information? It's also not a coincidence that the IRS, people don't know this, I brought the biggest Bivens class action on it about 10 years ago, is the main place that gathers people's medical records now in the name of enforcing aspects of Obamacare. The IRS has your private medical record. Now, I was able to stop that because we brought a suit that unraveled it all, so they haven't been able to go back and do it since. But that was, in my case, they basically stole 60 million medical records of 10 million Americans, including every judge and his family in the state of California. So you find out which judge's kid has got a secret drug problem, which judge's wife or judge himself has got some sort of psychological issue. Every movie director, screen actor, all of them, they got all their records. Major League Baseball players. It was like J. Edgar Hoover's blackmail wet dream file is what the IRS was seizing.
We're running out of time. Real personal question. What's happening with the vote counts? Like, we live in Arizona, and they have all these things that we audited, but nothing comes out. They audit the voting. What is happening with that? Why can't that information come out?
They're doing everything possible to keep a lid on that. Whether there's Open Records Act requests all over the place about looking at the actual ballots, because these ballots in many of these states were digitized. So it's like, let's take a look at them. What did they find in Arizona when they looked under the hood? They found ballots that were counted where the signature was literally a straight line. That was the signature. It was just a straight line. I mean, they didn't even try to fake the signature. It was like, hey, watch this. We'll do a straight line, and they'll still take the vote. And so there is so much evidence of problematic ballots, what I call constitutionally unqualified ballots, that they don't want that process. They don't want what people to look under the hood or to see what's there. And so there's every delay tactic that they can employ, the governments have employed, to keep people from seeing what these audits were finding.
Do you think it's gonna come out?
Ultimately, they can only buy time because you have a right under the open records laws to get this information. So in Georgia, it ultimately came out. Parts of it in Arizona came out. They're just hoping to buy time so that ideally they wouldn't have to. Well, it's like the FDA. The FDA was sued under FOIA for all the records that they looked at related to the vaccine to see how they determined it was safe and effective. And the FDA said, Judge, we need about 55 years before we can give that to you.
Right.
So
Final question, because George is our really dear friend. The two of you are enjoined to sue the Fed. What are you suing the Fed for?
So we want all of their records. It's using the Freedom of Information Act to look at everything they did. We asked for all their internal memorandums, internal notes, internal emails, internal comments, their own internal statements about what lawful authority they do or do not have, their own internal documentation about what do they say about the income tax and its limits. Do they say it's okay to do a wealth tax? Do they say it's okay to do a bunch of things that now politicians are floating in D.C.? I think we'll find a lot of incriminatory information buried in their own records, recognizing their own limitations and restrictions.
And
one more agency that's under suspicion is the FBI. What do you know about the FBI? I mean, I hear rumors. I'm not saying it's fact, but I hear a lot of suspicion on the FBI. I mean, what do you...
Well, if people want just an example of that, look at the D.B. Cooper case. The recent information came forward that, in fact, that guy that hijacked a plane in 1971 that the FBI said they couldn't find for 45 years, actually, they knew him all along because he was a CIA agent who was operating on the CIA payroll, decided just to do a little hijacking for fun and see if he could get away with it publicly. That's who the FBI is. Ever since Hoover's run it, they've been an unreliable agency, an unreliable institution. But that information also only came out because of the Freedom of Information Act.
Well, anyway, I really appreciate it. We could go on forever with you, Mr. Barnes, but the question is this George Orwell? Is this Big Brother? Is Big Brother now everywhere?
I don't think Orwell or Huxley could have even predicted some of the things that we're witnessing and seeing. It is definitely Orwellian. It is definitely like something out of 1984. And aspects of it seem like they use it as a script. They didn't see it as a warning sign. They used it as a script to actually enact. But aspects of it even go beyond what he could have imagined was possible and conceivable. So, and that is why, but the flip side to that is the system also is unaccustomed to people fighting back at the level they are. More people are self-informed, self-educated, and self-empowered than ever before. They're making a bigger, louder difference than ever before. And ultimately, even the courts of law and the courts of Congress ultimately hear their voices. And that's what I think that will be the game changer that will make this look different than 1984, and we're going to write our own ending to this script, and it's not going to be the totalitarian one they want.
Well, I really give you credit. I give George Gammon credit, for fighting back, because that's one of the most dangerous things you can do today. I mean, it's you basically raising your hand and say, "Hey, drone strike here." You know what I mean? They're going to come after you. So I really thank you. Any final words on that?
I want to say thank you, Robert. You give me some hope. Sometimes I get down these rabbit holes and it's dark and it's ugly and it's scary. But I happen to agree with what you're saying. You're in the pit of it, so I don't see what you see. But you're saying more and more people are standing up, they are waking up, they are fighting back, and if we get to that point, then we can turn this around.
So my ultimate final question is why? Is it a question about power corrupts and ultimate corrupts? That thing about power corrupting, is that all it is, or is it? Why would people want to control our lives as badly as they do?
Because it's the problem inherent to any kind of aggregated governmental power. The people who want control, long ago, an old anarchist friend of mine argued, look at who is going to seek positions of power when you create those within a state. It's going to be the worst group of people that seek that power. It's going to be the control freaks and the power freaks. And we're just seeing it on a different scale. But we're seeing it because I think a lot of the people in positions of power are scared at ordinary people taking their own lives back and asserting their own control and their own power. I like to say that, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing people he did not exist. The greatest trick the system ever pulled is convincing people that you cannot resist. The little secret is, yes, you can. And as long as you do, then that's what will change the world, and you will be the person in power, not these power freaks and control freaks.
So, Mr. Barnes, thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate everything you're doing, and we will join in any fight that we can with you and in this whole situation.
If we're still on air.
Which may not be the case.
So thank you, Robert Barnes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks a lot.
We'll come back with the final words for Rich Dad Radio. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Again, I want to thank Robert Barnes. His website is barneslawllp.com. What'd you think, Sarah?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you guys gave him all the credit for really standing up for everybody's freedoms and for the underdogs, because I feel like there's very few people in this world that are willing to stand up for what's right. Second thing is, I am petrified about our future. There's so much happening that we just have no control over, or feels like we have no control over. So hopefully people like him, can start making waves and we can start taking back our freedom.
Well, and as he said, resist. People are resisting now, and they're saying, no, I'm not going to take this vaccine. You can fire me. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And more people waking up. That's what it's going to take. And we need more Robert Barnes. We need more Robert Barnes in our world.
And to that point, Kim, I've noticed there's several hospital groups, the owners of several hospitals around the world who had vaccine mandates in place for their doctors and nurses are starting to get rid of those mandates because they're realizing without those nurses and doctors, they have nothing. Yep. So hopefully we'll see more and more of that, but it's terrifying.
I thought it was kind of interesting. It starts with, how you educate a lawyer. They got the best. You got to be, what they call, basically they're good at English and reading and writing, and they get them, and then they take their guts away. And then I have never met such gutless attorneys. Oh, don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do this. I'm going, well, don't do this.
Yeah.
I just cannot believe it. We're raising a bunch of wimps through our
But he said the system is creating that. Mm-hmm. The system wants that. The system doesn't want attorneys to stand up and fight for people's rights. And
the thing that's even more frightening about it, because it's the education. My new book coming out, it's Capitalist Manifesto. Plug for that's coming out in a few weeks. It's about education. So I went to military school, and our education is different than what they teach at Snowflake University. But the biggest thing that's the problem with knowing too much about the military, there's a woman who is now up on charges in the military because she was one of those drone strike people. What people may not realize, somebody can be sitting in D.C., Washington, D.C., and drone strike somebody in Russia. That's how pervasive the military is. So here we are, we're sitting in America. Oh, we're safe and protected. They can drone strike you here accidentally. Oh, we don't know what this drone went off. Because remember when we were in Pensacola with General Jack Bergman? These guys sit in basically it looks like an eggshell or something, and they're flying these drones all over the world. Mm-hmm. So they can hit you anywhere now. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so crucial about that Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel who criticized our Joint Chiefs of Staff. Even our military is gutless right now. I cannot believe they deserted Afghanistan. And now the starvation and everything that you're terrified about, communist takeover, is now happening in Afghanistan. But the power sits in Washington, D.C., because as a military guy, they can hit you from D.C. anywhere in the world, and that includes Scottsdale, Arizona. So that's what I'm going, holy mackerel. So when Robert Barnes was talking about what starts in education, that's our problem. They're shutting. They're called parents terrorists now. So when's a drone strike against a parent coming in or an assassination? That's what's frightening. Final words, Kim.
Well, final words is I do get hope from from Robert Barnes, and hearing that we'll never hear about all of these legal cases and court cases fighting and resisting what the government wants to do. Because it's not going to make the news, but there's so many attorneys out there, there's so many cases being filed against the vaccine mandates, against all our freedoms of speech, against the freedoms of our Constitution, and that to me was just heartfelt and gives me reason to think, hey, there's a possibility we can turn this around.
Right. So even Rich Dad Radio is migrating to, what are we migrating to? Because I know nothing about this stuff.
Well, we've been on Rumble, and we started Locals 3 or 4 months ago, something like that. And these are freedom platforms that allow us to speak freely. So that is our backup.
But always remember January 6th, the inauguration, that they're just finding out now. A lot of the people wearing MAGA hats were really working for the FBI and those guys.
Yep.
So right now the FBI is listening in, and the CIA is listening in on
probably so
all locals and all this stuff.
Yep.
So that's how pervasive it is. So that's why those who have not read, Big Brother is watching, and Orwell and Ayn Rand and Huxley, it's coming true, unfortunately. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio program. If you don't hear from us anymore, you know where we're at. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.